Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle.
How are things in Seattle, Zach?
Oh, they're beautiful. Too beautiful, probably. We're having a very hot June, but it's right now we can enjoy it. How about for you in New Zealand?
Yeah, quite nice up here in Auckland. We did have some pretty significant rainfall in the South Island, which closed a bunch of bridges in the last week, cut off a few areas, and has caused quite a lot of trouble. Nothing like a bit of a natural disaster to make people think a little bit about resilience and just general sustainability and resources as well. It's a little bit. It's very unfortunate for those people caught up in that, but it definitely makes you think about, how houses respond to events like that during, but also after, and going into recovery mode as well.
Yeah, we get periodic reminders every season, it seems like.
Well, I did hear someone say that these so-called quote unquote 1 in 100-year events seem to be happening more frequently.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on. We've got a great interview. I really enjoyed talking to our guest this week. It was a few weeks ago now, but great chat, and it was long overdue catching up. But before we get into that, we've got some people to thank for helping to bring us the Passive House podcast.
We sure do. I want to give a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxting Wheat Architects, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, RDH Building Science, Rockwool North America, Stocorp, and Zolo Windows. And our champion sponsor is SIGA. And our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority. So a big shout out to all of those fine organizations for supporting this work.
Yes, thank you. Really greatly appreciated, not just for this supporting this show, but also supplying great products and materials to enable people to do good work and to create better buildings. We're doing some training here at the moment, training people on some use of proclaimer membranes and tapes and bits and pieces, and generally we're just talking about air tightness and control layers in buildings. But one of the things I always say to people is you can't build a building just with membranes and tapes. You can, but it's a bit floppy.
Very floppy.
Yeah. So it's so great to, we need all these different systems and different products all working together to make buildings that work well. So it's so good to have a representation from across the board, because that's what designers need, what builders need, what consumers need to create healthy, energy efficient places.
Yeah, well said.
All right, well, let's get into this week's interview. I caught up with Brian Guinan from ISMART Building Group. He is in Perth, or just outside Perth in Western Australia. Funny thing about Western Australia, Zach, it seems to attract a high proportion of people that are interested in Passive House, and a lot of them seem to have accents. I don't know what that's about.
It's interesting, right? Daniel Kress comes up in the conversation, rightly so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another foreigner.
And there's a bunch of people that I've interviewed and have been on this show that have either ended up in Perth or have passed through their Daniel Crest course now in Sydney, but did start his Australia Passive House journey in Perth. So ISMART Building Group are now proudly Western Australia's most experienced passive house builder. They also do consultancy services for heat recovery, ventilation, air tightness, and what they call passive house detailing, which is a great thing to help kind of just get the word out there as to things like air tightness in a place where that is itself a foreign concept at the moment. People are just only getting their heads around that. So it's early days. We've got 4 certified passive homes completed to date, but a lot more on the way. And they also do a lot of work to pretty close to the passive house standard, including renovations. So I started out my chat with Brian asking him how he got into building and how he found Passive House in the first place.
Well, I'd like to start out by a bit of your backstory. I was actually just talking to Thomas. He's up here from Wellington at the moment, and he said, make sure you ask Brian about some of his previous work. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into doing what you're doing now and some of the things you've been involved in the past?
I guess if we go back to the very start, I'm a carpenter by trade. I started my apprenticeship back in 1996 under the care of my uncle and my father. Finished that in late 2000-ish and then started my own thing in Ireland, but quickly branched out, wanted to travel, got itchy feet. So I went to New York for about 6.5 odd years. Spent a lot of time there in mid to low rise, kind of brownstone stuff. But touching on Green Star, it was trying, but more satisfying construction codes and city requirements and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So while we were trying, I wouldn't say achievement would have been high on the priority list.
Trying as in to do what?
Yeah, so in trying to achieve Green Star with energy saving, rainwater harvesting, that kind of stuff. But in New York City back then, it was tough. It's a lot easier now, but yeah, I didn't really know enough at the time either. You know, I was project manager, and we kind of did what was on the books, if you know what I mean. But yeah, that was my start or my introduction to energy efficiency, and it was kind of where I started to get a passion for it.
So when you say trying and not quite hitting the mark, was that not quite hitting the mark in terms of certification under Green Star, or was it not hitting the mark in terms of the energy performance that you wanted to achieve?
No, I was kind of hitting the mark for both of those, but for me personally, when I started to research and look into it, I thought, look, there's so much more we can achieve. There's so much more we can do. It's a good starting point. At that time, I was unaware of Passive House. I had no idea what Passive House was. This is back in 2005, 2007, 2008-ish. I had no idea what Passive House was.
But it was established back in Ireland a while back.
Yeah, so that's why I was kind of, looking for more when I was in New York. Like in Ireland, we had much better efficiencies back then. We had double glazing, which was standard. We had UPC frames with thermally broken efficiencies and everything back in Ireland, way back when I was doing my apprenticeship. So to go to New York, and then it was, single glazing, insulation wasn't really spoken about. It was, some guys would spec it, some guys wouldn't. And then Green Star came along and started to influence that quite a bit. But it was, entry level stuff back then.
What was it that took you to New York in the first place?
Itchy feet, I guess. Really, right. I thought, look, I'm finished my apprenticeship now, and if I stay here much longer, I'll end up, married with a couple of kids, and I won't be able to go. So, I met my wife back then. So back in, I think it was maybe 2001. I met my wife, or 2000, and we went together, and kind of never looked back. Then we had a great time there. It was good, but in 2008, we left to come back to Ireland to get married because my parents wouldn't fly. They don't really want to fly. So we came back, and then GFC hit, and yeah, you're not allowed back. Sorry, boys, we got enough guys here.
Wow.
So my wife's brother-in-law was in Australia at the time. We gave him a ring, see what was going on, because as you know, Ireland was in a pretty bad situation then. There wasn't even work for the people that was there, let alone the people that were coming back from regional. So we got on a plane and came to Perth, and I guess the rest is history. Started off as a carpenter, doing formwork and stuff like that, and then quickly realized that, this is where I want to live. This is where I want to raise my family. It's kind of an overgrown town, really. It's a city, but it still has the mentality of a small town, if you know what I mean. Not taking anything from the city.
It's out there, it's kind of at the end of the road. But it's amazing. I've spoken to a few people that I've interviewed, Simone, Daniel. There seems to be a bit of a concentration of passive house people in that part of the world.
Yeah. So I think personally I would put it down to education. I think there's a lot of educated people in Perth. Maybe that's to do with mining industry and resources industry, possibly. I'm not sure, but when you have a higher educated per capita in a city, it tends to have more, willingness to expand or willingness to achieve better. So when you talk to people about passive house, while we're fighting an uphill struggle in the mainstream industry, there are people there that they want passive house and they want better and they want higher energy efficiencies, but more importantly, they want healthy living environments. And that's kind of where or what has pushed us to where we are today. If people didn't believe in us or didn't believe in passive house, we wouldn't have a job. So as passionate as we are and as much as we want to change the industry, I guess people have to believe and trust in us. And I guess that's why I think Perth is, I wouldn't say a leader, but we're definitely, in my opinion, we're probably overachieving a little bit in passive house.
Yep. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. So
what was your first impressions though when you first landed there? You get off the plane from Ireland and you start looking around at houses around the suburbs of Perth. What did you first see?
Look, it's hard to put words on that without insulting somebody. So, quite frankly, I loved the area. I loved the climate. I loved the people of Western Australia are so inviting and so warm, and it's a beautiful place to live, a beautiful place to raise kids, in my opinion. The industry itself is, it's really, really controlled and held back. So in my opinion, it's not necessarily the fault of the industry, it's the fault of the major players. And the major players, they will manipulate and use whatever they can in order to make the most money. And I think the biggest fault there is the NCC, in my opinion. When you have a national construction code that facilitates them to do this, then why would they change? And I really think the larger public have been spoiled with size and finish rather than performance. So, when you put form and function side by side, they pick form every time. Yeah. And it's because, major industry leaders had a monopoly on the market and they drive the market and they have so much marketing material and advertisement that say that this is what you need and not or this is what you want and not what you need. Nobody else has ever challenged that,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like to have a brick build, this is predominantly brick here. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with brick. We build with passive house with bricks all over the world. Like back in Ireland, in England, they build with brick and block all the time to passive house standards, and there's nothing wrong with it. The issue here is that you're allowed to build a clay brick house with a cavity with no insulation in it. And you can put single glazing in there and your roofing, there's no attention to insulation, there's no attention to air tightness or performance in any way. And for me, it's not the industry. I think the National Construction Code needs to drive the change, and that is happening. We can see that. We can see it in all the codes and the changes that are upcoming at the moment.
I think it's a really interesting point. What you're describing is a double cavity brick wall, which to a lot of people in Australia is the norm because it's what's done everywhere there. But I know that a lot of New Zealand builders would just scratch their heads over that to see where's the framing, where's the insulation.
But I think that speaks to how an industry can get used to just what's done locally, and it just become the norm and just stay that way. And it is often really useful to have people like yourself who come with some worldly expertise to say, there's a better way of doing things.
Yeah. I think a lot of the influence in any industry is standard industry practice.
Yeah.
So standard industry practice will be the major dictator in how you progress in the industry, I think. So when we started out in this journey 5-6 years ago, there's a couple of different panel types we were looking at. And, after we sat down, we reviewed, what the industry is and what's standard practice in the industry. And more importantly, how can we have a product that, instead of fighting the fight of starting to tell people exactly how it should be and it could be, let's say, take an existing product and let's upgrade it so that you're not fighting that fight. So right now we have something that's already an Australian standard, but now we're going to change it. So I liken it to, instead of changing the wheel, let's just change the tire. So we'll use the existing wheel and we'll get a new tire and put it on it, and it's a much better tire and no different than a Formula One race or a motorcycle race or anything you're doing like that. The better the tires, the faster you go, the quicker you can stop. Well, in this instance, if you take a standard industry practice, so let's say Australian Standard 1684, which is a standard for timber frame in the industry. So every carpenter should, if they're a qualified carpenter, should know this code. They should know a house is built in timber frame. If we take that standard industry practice, which is 1684, and we now utilize that and upgrade it to the Passive House performance by introducing the correct air tightness membranes on the internal, vapor permeable, the correct water vapor membranes on the external, or weatherproof membranes on the external, and then we introduce the correct insulations, we upgrade the windows, we introduce air tightness, and we introduce heat recovery ventilation. But in theory, it's still the same timber frame house. We haven't really done anything with the structure as such. So we're in compliance with our wind codes and our engineering and everything that comes along with it. So the task for us when we started out was, right, well, how can we get the existing code and adopt it to Passive House standards for Australia? But more importantly, how can we do it with the products that's available here? Because that's what this is all about. You're not going to be financially efficient if you don't have availability of materials. Similar to the reason why we build with clay brick in Perth predominantly is because there's clay in the hills. It's easily to get out, it's easy to make bricks, and it's easy to get them to site. So it's no different than the pyramids being built. The pyramids are built because there was an abundance of that material there.
Yeah.
So similarly to the industry here, we have quite a good availability of timber in the southwest and a Great Southern. So for us, it's a no-brainer, really. Timber frame and Passive House, they go hand in hand.
So do you think that's an important aspect to increase the adoption of things like passive houses, not to just wholesale throw out what's there, but to respect the knowledge, respect the systems, and just say, how can we tweak these rather than completely change them and say that they're rubbish?
Yeah, you're not going to get as an efficient market penetration unless you have a product that's already there. So in my opinion, that's just my opinion, but from what we've seen, you're going to have much quicker availability to adopt the product into the market if it's something that's already there and you're just changing or upgrading it. And even when it comes to carpenters that we use, so we have electricians, plumbers, and all these guys, but if they've worked with a timber frame before, it's quite simple. The process is quite simple. We just educate them on air tightness and heat recovery ventilation and energy efficiency, which is a sit down at any one of the many presentations I've given. So if we have a trade that wants to come on, they go on the tender list, and it's mandatory that they come to one of my presentations. So they understand what Passive House is before they start working for us.
Right. Nice.
So for me, that's one of the biggest things is education in the industry. But yeah, adopting the current installations and procedures and standards that we already have. I think that's...
What about things like windows, though? Because you can't just tweak a regular single glazed frame. You kind of need a completely different product there.
Yeah, so you have to get that product. So for us, that was we're fortunate enough that there's a supplier in Western Australia who manufactures and distributes the Comerling brand here. Now, while it's not the highest performing window in the world, we've built 4 certified passive houses with that product. So it's more down to the design in that. But to answer your question, I guess the windows is something that you can't substitute. But what you can do is you can bring them along for the ride. So if there's somebody that has a product here and it's a premium product, I wouldn't say that they don't necessarily realize it's a premium product, but that they understand the benefits of that product. So again, we bring them to the presentations. We show them a PHPP on how it works. Like the information that they would put on WERS, while it's valuable, we need so much more than that to actually show the performance of the window installed. And the only way to do that is to show them a PHPP.
So WERS is the window energy rating scheme, which is really just looking at what the U values and solar heat gain coefficient.
Yeah, it's generic. It's generic information. Now, for the broader industry, it's fantastic because it will show you the differences in performance, on a generic scale. So if you were building a house, or if you were, if you had a project builder or a large project that was coming up and you wanted to see, right, well, what's the efficiencies I can get from different windows? Because most people just say, the builder will tell them that's the windows you get and that's it. So unless they have the information, which WERS gives, but for us, we need more information than that. But I think there's a bigger picture in that people need education on what the actual performance of windows is. So a lot of people think that a window is for looking out and it's a hole in the wall. And we all know that it's so much more than that. So much more. So I think there's that portion of education is, it's missing hugely from the industry.
Yeah. And I'd suggest from the consumer end as well, because if you get consumers getting that level of understanding and realizing that a window is not a window, then they'll start asking the right questions of designers and builders.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, that's right. But I don't know if that's something you can do overnight. I think the only way to do that, and we've been banging on this door for many years, is you keep building them, you keep proving, you put data loggers in there and you show how the windows perform, you show how the house performs. But more importantly, you need to get into, and this is what we're striving to now, is to build those higher end homes that get into the magazines and win awards. I think that's where people start to, their ears start to prick up and they start to listen and pay attention, When it comes to the consumer, you can have shotgun approach, but you're not going to hit them. You're going to hit them with impression, and impression is through awards and magazines, etc., or TV programs or podcasts, exactly like what you're doing and have been doing for quite a while.
And passive houses that look beautiful and make for good photographs on glossy magazines.
Yes. And
tell me though, how did you get your first passive house client?
The reality is through Daniel Kress, believe it or not. Daniel Kress used to work with us over here in Australia. He started out, and he was probably the first person that explained passive house in detail to me. So very vague understandings until I met Daniel, and he did a lot for me when it comes to education. And then while he worked with us, he met with our first passive house client. Now that client came as a standard passive house client, built to passive house principles, but not certified, which was fine. The certification process we did in the background without the client's knowledge, kind of thing.
Right.
So the client himself,
was that for your own understanding, or just because you wanted to verify it for yourselves?
A bit of both. So we did want to verify it for ourselves, but when we saw this particular build, the client himself, Carlos, is an engineer. So he had a very good understanding of passive solar principles. And then he gave us a very good design brief. He basically designed this house himself. And then when we took it through to planning stages, we did a PHPP. Daniel Kress actually did the first PHPP run on it. And we saw it come back really good. And then we just made the executive decision in-house to say, right, let's put the time, effort, and money into this and get this certified. Now, if we don't meet the air tightness, no harm, no foul. We've done a really good job on it. We know how it's going to perform. But if we do meet it, then the client has a certified passive home.
Did you have any issues or challenges communicating about air tightness, given that he
had an understanding of passive solar. So I imagine there's a lot of shading, a lot of eaves, maybe some natural ventilation and thermal mass.
Yeah, so he did, like when I say he had a very good understanding of passive solar, that was the start of his journey. So while he had that understanding, he started to look into passive house because he's from America himself, so he understands. So he came specifically looking for us because he knew that he wanted a passive house.
Okay.
Yeah, so he already had the
So
understanding.
he'd already sort of made that leap.
Yeah, he'd made the link and he knew what we could deliver. So he was kind of already sold on what we did. We just needed to make sure that we hit the budget and then we hit the scheduling, which, the scheduling is never an issue for us because we're pre-manufactured. We're way quicker than anybody in Western Australia. But the budgeting does tend to be a little bit of an issue for us. But having said that, that house was built for just under $2,000 a square meter, which is extremely cheap.
And where to from there? Did that become like a showcase example for you that you could leverage off and attract more clients?
Yeah, that was a bit of a honeypot.
Right.
We did an open day on that one. So normally when we build a house, we sit the clients down at contract stage and we say, look, there's two things we need from you guys and we need approval. One is we need to use the home at lockup. We do a sundowner event, which is on a Friday afternoon, and I do a presentation on passive house with relevance to that particular home. So it's 45-minute to an hour presentation. There's usually anywhere from 60 to 100 people, and depending on what time of the year it is. But
right. So you require as a part of your contract to say you will let us hold a workshop at the building site.
Yes, while it's in
and
our
you
possession,
get between a minimum of 60 people there.
Look, when it started
pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID, yeah. When it started out, there was my first one. I think there was 15 people. Now we'd have anywhere from 60 to 100 sign up, and we'd expect to see, anywhere between 50 and 70 show up, depending on what night it is.
I hope it's a big house.
Yeah. During COVID, we couldn't, obviously, but yeah. A lot of the people won't stay for the presentation because they've seen them before. So sitting at the presentation, we usually have about 35 to 40.
Right. But come and have a look. But that's what did you say at lockup stage?
That's at lockup stage. So we have the externals of the house are all but complete. The internals have all the services installed, HRV installed. It's ready for gyprock at that point.
Right.
So all of the membranes are exposed.
Oh, so they can still see the air tightness membrane.
Yes.
Right.
That's very important for us to explain because we invite builders, architects, engineers, whoever wants to come and have a look, really. Because we, similar to anybody in the passive house industry, we don't have any secrets. We're not trying to hide anything. Like if we're going to influence the industry, we need to do it together as a group. Otherwise, we're just, we're all climbing the same hill and nobody's helping one another.
Well, and critically at that stage, you're showing everyone the bits that aren't going to be in the glossy magazine later on because they're all going to be covered up.
Correct. And that is the performance of the home, is what you see at lockup. And that's why we do it. It's extremely important that we do that. And then when we finish the home, we let the client move in for about 6 months or so. So, right. The house is well dried out. It's performing well. The clients have moved in. They're settled with their furniture. And then we usually do an open house of that same house on a Saturday morning for 4 or 5 hours. So anybody that's seen it at the lockup stage then has the opportunity to come back and see it at finish stage.
I'm just thinking about how the industry would change if all builders did that. Just that one thing, instead of running a mile once they finished and hope that they never hear from their clients again. Just the knowledge that you're wanting to go back there 6 months later and bring other people with you. That must be a game changer for how you actually approach the whole project.
I don't know.
You probably don't think of it that way, but I'm just thinking of a regular, particularly a volume builder who's just build it, sell it, move on to the next one.
Yeah. I don't know. I never actually think about it. For me, it's when you build a passive house, you've got nothing to hide. And no matter what you do, there's always proof. So if we say we're going to build something, we're going to build it and it's going to perform. And anyone that's in the passive house industry knows that that's how it is. Because if it doesn't perform, you're going to have to figure out why. You're going to have to, more importantly, you're going to have to fix why.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So for me, the open days is something that, like, we're not afraid of anything. We're not afraid. Like, if a client comes back to me and says, "Oh, this end of the house is overheating," I'll go straight back and say, "Yeah, no worries. Let's do that. Let's figure out why." Because at the end of the day, we're in a hot, I wouldn't say a hot climate, but a hotter climate. Like, we're climate zone 5 here, so it does get hot during the summer. But we've noticed in the last couple of years.
you see periods of 40 degrees Celsius for what, 1 or 2 weeks sometimes,
Even more. Like, this summer's been extremely hot,
and staying above, around the 30s at night time as well. It often doesn't you don't get that cooling necessarily in the peak of summer.
Yeah, that's right. That is challenging, and we've noticed more in the past 2 to 3 years that humidity levels are higher as well. So we've got prolonged times of humidity where we can't have an ERV, or we're recommended not to have an ERV, and in those periods, the humidity levels in the house are slightly higher, because we're getting longer periods. Now, for the rest of the year, it's fine. It's no problem. But then we are, like, being passive house builder, we're always curious on how we can improve. Do we introduce a dehumidifier? Do we do this? Do we do that? And, like, for anyone that's in the passive house industry, something like that always presents as a challenge. How can we fix this?
Are you putting mechanical cooling? Like, do these places have reverse cycle air conditioning?
Yeah. They all would have, like, single stories would have one, depending on the size, possibly two 1.5 splits, 1.5 kilowatt splits. And then 2 stories would have one upstairs, one downstairs, depending on the size.
Right.
Some of the lately we've been putting in 2.5s because of, future-proofing the design in the house and future-proofing for climate change, because we all know that's a problem. So if you put in a 2.5 kilowatt split system, it's the same price as a 1.5.
Plus, you might need it when you get all that 50 people around inside the house on a summer's night.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So where to from here, Brian? You kind of established now. People know what you've got. A few projects under your belt. Is it sort of onwards and upwards? Do you see is it a steady growth of interest in the market?
We've seen a spike in the past, probably since just after Christmas. In the past 2-3 months, we have seen a spike. More builders asking questions, more architects asking questions, more drawings coming through, a lot more requests for consultation in the early periods, which is good. So from what we're looking at, we can see that passive house is starting to really, it's starting to get some ground roots here, rather than us just, building passive house. And there's a couple of other people in Perth that's trying their hand at it as well. And it's not just 2 or 3 now. It's probably 10 to 15 that are all looking. And architects are, really starting to pay attention. And that's where we know, like, as much as we would like to change this industry, we won't. We can, we can be some of the influencers in the industry, but as a builder, I can only build them. The real change will come with architects. We know that. It's architects and engineers. And more importantly, public projects, libraries. Like, I would love to get stuck into, a police station or a firehouse or something like that, whereas 24-hour labor force in there. Like, this is where passive house really can excel. But I don't know if we're ready for that just yet, But for me, that's where the future is. That's what I strive to,
Yeah. Nice. Where's your region of the geographic region of work at the moment?
We're based mostly metro at the moment. We've got one up in Lower Chittering, which is about an hour and 15 minutes north, but we're basically Perth metro. We have built 5 in the Denmark area, 1 in Bridgetown, and we've got 1 in Bunbury at the moment, which is in the final stages of contract. That'll be a certified passive house, a large 2-story. And then there's another one in Denmark, which possibly will be certified. It's still in conversation at the moment, but we would expect that to start late this year.
And did I hear you say that you do some panelization? You do some prefab?
Yeah, so we started out doing our own panels because basically nobody else wanted to do them. So,
well, at least not on your side of the country, anyway.
No, not on our side of the country.
It's a long way to Burkhardt's workshop from where you are.
If only. But funny you should mention Burkhard. Actually, he did my tradesperson course back in the
Of course
day.
he did, yeah.
Back in 2017. That's a long time ago. But yes, we did our own panel manufacturing, but financial viability was always challenging. It was always very difficult to have a factory to manufacture your own panels, and only your own panels meant the dead time in the factory was just so difficult to maintain. Like Burkhard was very clever in that he did, floor panel cassettes and stuff like that he could sell to market besides his own builds. Now, unfortunately, there was no industry in WA for that. Nobody wanted the panels. Nobody wanted timber frame. It's a little bit different now. But yeah, luckily enough, we sustained that. We sustained it for probably 4 years. And then we had a company called Offsite. Porrick Mellett is a mate of mine. He owns Offsite. He started pre-manufactured panels in WA probably about 2 years ago. He did them for quite a while, and then he just got too busy with commercial projects, and commercial projects are where it's at when it comes to financial reward in pre-manufacture. So we now have Collie, Truss and Frame, who are a great bunch. They've been in WA for many, many years. Family-oriented business, very good. They've been doing our panels for probably a little over a year now, year and a half maybe. And the quality is very good.
And so was that a company that was doing pre-nail truss and frame type work already?
Yeah, they've been doing it for many years. I think I'd say 25 years would be probably cutting them short. They've probably been doing it for longer.
Right. So that's another example of changing the tires, not the wheel. So you've gone back to kind of an existing business, an existing system, but tweaked it to your preferences and your requirements.
Yeah, and these guys are quite excited too because they know where the industry is going. They know that energy efficiency is going to be high in the market, and they realize it. Normally, like previously, they used to do a lot of roof trusses and just open wall frames, but they see the potential in being a player in the industry for this. But
I really like that concept, just that philosophy of using existing expertise and skills, and not saying, well, everything we've done up to now is rubbish. Let's throw it out and start from scratch. But no, there's actually some good businesses and some good tradespeople out there.
Oh yeah, otherwise we wouldn't have built what we've got. It's not fair to say that there's not good people out there. There's plenty in the industry which has been built perfectly and to a very high standard. It's not to say that we can't use those people and we can't train everyone in the industry. I'm not saying that every single house has to be a passive house or every single house has to be a timber frame house. But let's look at what we can achieve and what we can improve with what we've got already. Don't chuck it away.
When you were back in New York, Thomas said I had to ask you about some of the other work that you got up to. You did quite a lot of building for people who weren't necessarily paying clients. Is that correct?
Say that again, sorry?
Did you do some work for, was it veterans or Habitat for Humanity?
Oh, that was here.
That was in Perth, was it?
Yeah, so that was NDIS and Veterans Affairs.
Right.
So I did quite a bit of work for them 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
Rewarding, but extremely difficult. When we did it first, it was just NDIS, and it was quite easy to deal with. I probably wouldn't get into it on this podcast, but we changed government, politics got in the way, and it just got, the end user just got used. Yeah, it wasn't very efficient. Let's just say that. It was not very efficient.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame. I've seen that happen with a lot of these housing organisations that are trying to do good things, and they just kind of get bogged down a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, just layers and layers and layers of administration, etc., which, just in my opinion wasn't required, but it's just my opinion. Maybe it is required. But
so where's the best place for people to find you and have a look at some of the great work that you've done?
Well, we're on the internet, ISMART Building Group. So if you type in ismart-bg.com.au, that's the website. Otherwise, you jump on. We're probably on YouTube. There's quite a few on YouTube. I've done some interviews with some past clients.
Yeah.
So you'll find us there. But yeah,
we're on the internet, I guess.
I'll
on the
link
website.
up your sites so that people can find that, because you've got some quite a few of your projects there, some case studies that people go and have a look at some of those builds as well. And I like that you've got some of the vital stats in those as well, so the air change rates and the R values and some of the other information people can get stuck into.
Yeah, we've got a lot more coming up too. We've started about a little over a year ago. We've put data loggers in 6 or 8 houses, and we've got not just temperature. We've got air quality monitors. We've also got kilowatt hour meters on the air cons in 2 houses, so one certified and one not certified, roughly the same size. And we just want to compare between the two, see what the differences are.
I hope that the data from those is really, really boring.
It is,
which is
it's really
the unfortunate
boring.
thing. Everyone loves to stick sensors in passive houses, and if they work well, it's pretty much a flat line.
Yeah, that's where it's at. That's where it's at. Yeah. But it's good. It's good to see those results coming back, because it means we're doing something right.
It is very good to have that confidence and knowing that everything's working.
Yeah.
Hey, well, thank you very much for your time today, Brian, but also for your journey and the work that you've done, being a bit of a leader in the industry and educating the market. I think is so important, like you say, not just the 1 or 2 houses that you or 3 or 4 that you're building at one time, but getting those crowds in and introducing them to what you're doing is fantastic. So hopefully someone from council ends up at one of those workshops, one of those open homes, and decides that they're going to build their new library to Passive House standard.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt.
And that was Brian Guinan of ISMART Building Group. He's based in Perth in Western Australia. I really enjoyed chatting to Brian, got a lot out of it. What did you think of that chat, Zach?
Oh, great conversation. I, was struck by his insights around how to make transformative change in this context where the base code is so basic. Yeah, I guess you could say. And this notion of that you really can make transformative change by making existing technologies better, and that he really feels like that's the way to move the ball down the field the quickest. So don't shock people with entirely new approaches and new systems, but find ways to just do our current technologies of building in better ways. And that does mean adding things like better windows as you guys got into it. And there's no way around some of the elements of it, but I think that's one of the things that's great about Passive House. I guess you can make you're making adjustments here, adjustments there that are informed by physics that in the end accrue to become really revolutionary in terms of the energy gains that they bring.
I think it's a really good point about it in a context of having such a big difference between where the code's at or where standard practice is currently and Passive House. And that's a pretty stark contrast in places like Western Australia or most of Australia at the moment, in New Zealand as well. I am aware of places, if we think about Germany, now parts of British Columbia, Canada, where there's a narrowing gap between building standards and Passive House. And you have to sort of do minor tweaks just to get there. I think it's a double-edged sword because on one hand, that makes it easy for people to just throw up their hands and say, oh, this is too hard, it's way too expensive, why would I need this? But on the other hand, when you do provide a Passive House to someone in Perth, it's such a contrast to how a normal building performs that it's really easy to show the difference, because you go from one house to the other, either in the middle of winter or in the middle of summer, and you experience the difference of what it feels like. And so we definitely need more of that to show the way. And I really hope, and I feel confident that government's policymakers will eventually close that gap as well, so there isn't such a stark contrast. But at the moment, that's the reality of where we're at in this part of the world.
Yeah, well, maybe you can leapfrog some of the agonizingly slow incremental progress that we've been going through in I'm in Washington State. In Washington State, I mean, we're actually getting closer and closer. But man, it's just these little gains, and actually that starts to challenge. There are some ways that where the little incremental improvements become more and more difficult, and you really need to get to a place where, like, we need to rethink the way that we approach this problem.
Leapfrogging would be good, as opposed to just reinventing the wheel and making all the same mistakes.
Well, the other thing that's hard about the incremental piece for builders and for developers is that you're changing the rules every 3 years, and so people are relearning the rule book every 3 years, and the way that they do practice. And they're definitely, I definitely talk to builders and developers who feel like, it'd be easier for me to support this progress if I knew that we were just jumping to the end goal.
And product suppliers as well. Like window manufacturers, if they invest in a whole bunch of plant, they want to get a good return out of that. They don't want to be changing it every 3 years to upgrade to the next level. But if they have to upgrade it, then they may as well say, well, let's make a step change to the next level.
Well, the other piece that I thought was, and I think we're pointing to this a little bit of examples, is the work that he does to do these open houses, which are they're like open wall open houses, which is brilliant.
Open houses.
That's such an important to show what's typically hidden. Is part of it, and then just the experiential piece of being in a passive house. Those two things are really powerful.
There's so much I like about that idea, and I've mentioned it to a lot of builders since talking to Brian, and they've said, "Oh, that's a good idea too." Firstly, the celebration of that point of the build, rather than it being a really stressful, we're going to get there, it might not be a passive house or certified or not, but just celebrating getting to that point, having a bit of a recognition of that, I think is really important. But really just bringing people in. I love the idea of a builder bringing future consumers, bringing future clients into a home when it's half finished to show them what makes it different. Because all of the stuff, I mean, we've got this problem because at work we sell membranes and tapes. At the completion of a building, they're all invisible. It's all hidden behind the wall. So it's really hard for us to compete with beautiful photos of kitchens and bathrooms because our stuff is not that sexy for a start. But even when it's there, it's but then it's it's completely covered up. So the time to bring people in is when that building's half complete. You're doing the blower door test, you're doing a pre-lining check, and then you can show them how it feels, even though the building's not complete. So I really love that idea of having a little party, celebrating that point of the build, and allowing others to come in and experiencing it.
Right, and so crucial in the early days of what we hope to be a major market transformation. It's so crucial to leverage each example to the the greatest extent possible. So definitely.
And this time of year, this time of year, the middle of the year, is a perfect time to do that wherever you are, because it's either really cold or really hot. So the greatest time to do that is a really cold, windy day, and you bring someone on site and you go inside and it's like, wow, it's actually quite warm in here, and the heater's not even on because there isn't one.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Anything else from Brian?
Well, he's also being clever about using the tools of design to make the case to clients, and just another piece that struck me was using the PHPP to show, hey, this is the impact that these better windows, for example, have on the project, and to show me the numbers. What's going on? It's smart.
Yeah. ISMART.
Hey, iSmart. There you go.
Awesome. Yet another leader where that's the other thing of having, we're in the early days. So we've got people who are really stepping up there and making a change. And Brian's certainly one of them. And a lot of the people that we've spoken to, certainly in this part of the world, are industry leaders just by virtue of it being kind of in its infancy at the moment. So great people doing great work. And it's really nice to have them on the show to talk about what they're doing, hopefully inspiring and motivating for others out there as well.
Yeah, it's a real privilege.
All right. We've got some busy time as usual. What are some of the things we've got going on at the moment?
Yeah, we have a big week coming up. This week is the North American Passive House Network's conference, Passive House for All. This is a hybrid conference. So anyone from around the world can attend virtually, and then there also will be a physical conference happening. Well, they're happening together. They're both together. It's hybrid. That's what's going on. It's pretty great, and I'm really excited. I get to go.
It's going to be people together. In a
people
room.
together. I know, talking about Passive House. It's pretty revolutionary, pretty phenomenal here. So that's happening June 10th and June 11th. And we at the Passive House Accelerator have a discount code, which is a little bit complicated to read out. So I won't, but I'll include it in the show notes. There's 20% off the conference registration with this Passive House Accelerator discount code, which is cool.
Awesome.
On Thursday, after the first day of the conference, Passive House Accelerator will be hosting an online social at the end of that Thursday day for about half an hour. So we're hoping that attendees will join us, and this is a chance to have small group conversations and mingle online with some of the presenters from the day and connect in community. So we're all excited. We're going to be doing some interviews at the conference itself as well that we'll publish after the conference. So all sorts of fun stuff at the Accelerator. What was that? Yeah.
Live interviews.
I don't know. We should probably do some like live Instagram stuff and actually broadcast at live. So earlier this week on Tuesday, Construction Tech will feature Marius Soflit of Creative Engineering. He's in Romania, and he's going to be presenting the construction details and approach to the largest passive house building in Eastern Europe, passive house office building in Eastern Europe, which incorporates a lot of CLT as well. And then the Global Passive House Happy Hour on Wednesday. This is, of course, Thursday for you in New Zealand and Australia. That's the eve of the North American Passive House Network Conference. So we've been working with Ken Levinson to align the programming. Caitlin and Tony from Cycle Architecture and Planning will be presenting the Crown Heights Passive House. It's a New York project. It's one of the winners of the NYSERDA Buildings of Excellence Awards. That'll be great. And then one last thing I want to mention is that on Thursday, June 24th, we are hosting the Centering Equity in Passive House community. This is a community workshop for the Passive House community. It's co-presented by Astrid County and Johnny Rezvani. This is an outgrowth of their participation with the NAACP on Centering Equity and Sustainable Buildings. It's going to be a great event. Thursday, June 24th, 7 p.m. Eastern.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it is. Lots of stuff. It's exciting.
That is exciting, and so great to have that North American Passive House back with a real live component. It's certainly one of the highlight events in the Passive House calendar, and awesome now that people can join from wherever you are as well.
Yeah, and I absolutely, and I do encourage people. I mean, NAPHN is out on they're on the bleeding edge here of the transition out of COVID. So which I really appreciate that they're doing this big event, and they're doing it hybrid, online and in person. And I encourage everybody to support the effort by registering and taking part, so that they can be successful and continue to do the great programming that they do.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you, Matthew. This is fun.
Thank you.
As always.
Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back again with another great interview next week on the Passive House podcast.